It was just another long day at work. The last train home seemed like a lifeline, but tonight it was something else entirely, the narrator says in a calm, reflective tone as the sound of distant train horns and soft rainfall fades in. The commuter, muttering to himself, tired, says, "Finally, the last train. I just need to get home." The sound of train doors sliding open with a soft chime is followed by footsteps echoing in an empty space. The train was empty except for one man sitting at the far end. He wore a black coat, his face obscured by shadows, the narrator adds, calm but with a hint of foreboding. The sound of the train starting to move fills the air, the rhythmic clattering of wheels on tracks growing louder. "Weird. Never seen this route before," the commuter mumbles, curious, glancing around. He taps his phone, but faint static is all that greets him. "No signal?" "That's odd," he mutters, confused. Standing up, the commuter walks toward the intercom. His footsteps echo slightly before he presses the button, only to be met with more static. "Excuse me? Can anyone hear me? Where is this train going?" he asks nervously, his voice louder now. The route was unfamiliar. The station's names were written in symbols he couldn't recognize, the narrator remarks, tension building in their voice. The train accelerates, its wheels screeching slightly as the commuter yells, "Hey! Stop the train!" Footsteps approach the other end of the carriage, accompanied by the faint sound of breathing growing closer. The man in black didn't move, but his gaze, it never wavered, the narrator states, their tone darker now. "What is this? What's happening?" the commuter whispers desperately, his voice trembling. A cold breath brushes against him, and a sudden sharp intake of air breaks the silence. The man in black, in a deep, distorted voice, intones, "You're not going home." A loud screech echoes as the train speeds up unnaturally. The commuter screams, but the sound cuts to silence. "The last train home, where no one ever arrives," the narrator concludes ominously, their voice slow and chilling. The sound of a train horn fades into the distance as an echoing whisper softly asks, "Would you board the last train? Think twice before you do." They say every old hotel has its secrets, but this one was different, the narrator begins, their voice low and chilling as soft piano notes echo faintly in the background. A traveler, exhausted from a long journey, sighs as they enter their dimly lit hotel room. "Finally, some rest," they murmur, tossing their bag onto the chair. The sound of a creaky door closing sends a shiver through the air. The narrator continues, "The room was ordinary, almost forgettable, except for the large mirror on the wall directly facing the bed. Sound of faint wind whistling outside the window. The traveler, curious, approaches the mirror and pauses. Looks old, they say, touching the frame. Their reflection stares back, but something seems off. The light flickers slightly. "Huh," they mutter, stepping back. As the night deepened, the traveler couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the narrator says ominously. The sound of sheets rustling fills the room as the traveler shifts uncomfortably in bed. Eyes closed, they hear it. The faintest whisper. "Who's there?" they call out, their voice trembling. Silence. Then the sound of a faint knock, soft, deliberate, coming from inside the mirror. The traveler sits up, heart pounding. "This can't be real," they whisper, slowly approaching the mirror again. Their reflection stares back, but then it smiles. They are not smiling. The narrator's voice deepens. The figure in the mirror stepped forward as if the glass was no barrier at all. "No!" the traveler screams as the reflection reaches out, their hand meeting cold glass. But the reflection's hand presses through, gripping their wrist. The traveler struggles, pulling away as the sound of shattering glass erupts. Silence falls, leaving only the faint wind outside. The room is empty, the bed untouched. Only the mirror remains, its surface perfectly smooth, except for a single handprint on the inside. The narrator whispers, "If you ever stay in an old hotel room, don't look too closely into the mirror. You might not like what looks back." The doll collector. Sometimes gifts from the past carry more than just memories. The narrator begins, their voice calm but eerie as faint music box notes play in the background. A child, smiling, says, "Wow, an antique doll." They cradle the porcelain figure with care. "It's from Aunt Clara," their mother says, watching them play. The sound of the doll's delicate limbs clinking softly adds to the unease. It started as innocent play, but soon the doll began to move, the narrator says ominously. One evening, the child gasps, "Mommy, it's on the shelf. I didn't put it there," they insist. The faint creak of footsteps in the distance makes the atmosphere heavier. The parents, chuckling nervously, dismiss it as imagination. "Kids and their wild stories," the father says, shaking his head. But that night, whispers echo through the house, faintly calling the child's name. Emma. Emma ... The narrator continues. The doll appeared in different rooms, always watching, its human-like eyes glinting eerily in the moonlight. One night, the mother wakes suddenly. A feeling of dread washes over her. "What's that noise?" she whispers, nudging her husband. Together, they follow the faint sound to the attic. The attic was filled with dust, cobwebs, and dolls, the narrator describes. Hundreds of them, each with lifelike eyes that seem to follow their every move. The father, voice shaking, mutters, "Why are these here?" "We don't collect dolls." Suddenly, a childlike giggle pierces the silence. "Who's there?" the mother calls out, clutching her husband's arm. The narrator's voice darkens. At the center of the room stood the antique doll, its head tilted, its smile unnaturally wide. And then it blinked. "Run!" the father yells as the attic door slams shut behind them. Their screams are muffled, and the house falls silent once more. The faint music box tune plays again as the narrator whispers, "Beware of gifts from the past, for they may come with strings attached." Some places are meant to be left undisturbed, the narrator begins, their voice somber as faint echoes of dripping water and creaking wood fill the background. A teenager, curious and restless, says, "Why does Mom always say to stay out of the basement?" "It's just a basement." They descend the narrow stairs, the wooden steps creaking beneath their weight. The basement was dark, damp, and filled with old boxes, forgotten furniture, and shadows, the narrator continues, their voice tinged with unease. The sound of the teenager's flashlight clicking on punctuates the silence. "What's even down here?" they mutter, brushing cobwebs aside. The beam of the flashlight sweeps across the room, revealing dust-covered shelves and something else. A faint movement catches their eye. "What was that?" they whisper, their voice trembling slightly. The shadows seemed alive, shifting in ways that defied the light, the narrator describes, the tension rising. The flashlight flickers, and the teenager's breathing quickens. "It's just the power, right?" they stammer, their voice unconvincing. A soft whisper echoes through the space. "Come closer," it says, faint but chilling. The teenager freezes. "Who's there?" they call out, their voice shaking. The whisper comes again, louder this time. "Closer." They couldn't help but move toward the voice, the narrator remarks. Their steps are hesitant, each one echoing ominously. The beam of the flashlight falls on an old mirror leaned against the wall. The reflection is wrong. It shows the teenager standing still, yet their shadow moves, extending an arm toward them. "No, this isn't real," they say, backing away. But the shadow steps out of the mirror, towering over them, its form twisting and writhing like smoke. Its voice is deep and guttural. "You shouldn't have come here." The narrator's voice drops, filled with dread. The door to the basement slammed shut, and the flashlight went out. All that remained was darkness and the shadow. The faint sound of footsteps echoes once more as the narrator concludes, "Sometimes curiosity opens doors that should remain locked. The basement is one of them."